都听见资本。本期视频为您带来的是摩根大通在3月14日的周报内容，直接把当前全球经济的热点问题摆上了台面。经济学家布鲁斯和乔两位大咖针对年初经济数据、政策不确定性、关税威胁还有通胀压力展开了一场激烈交锋，话题一个比一个抓人眼球。先说经济数据，他们提到美国和全球经济基本面还算稳，但年初以来明显放缓，尤其是美国的数据没达到预期，让人捏了把汗。近期新闻也频频报道消费者信心下滑，比如密歇根指数跌到2年来低点，企业那边更是悲观， CEO 们普遍觉得未来半年经济增长可能停滞甚至倒退。接着就是关税问题，简直是这次讨论的炸弹。布鲁斯和乔都觉得关税政策的不确定性已经开始砸市场情绪的盘，连带着经济活动也可能跟着遭殃。他们特别提到，如果4月初关税再升级，比如对加拿大和墨西哥动手，甚至引发对等报复，衰退风险就得往上窜。乔甚至估算概率可能超 40%。 社交媒体上也有类似声音，不少人担心这种政策乱局会把企业和消费者信心彻底拖垮。不过布鲁斯稍微乐观点，认为如果4月能稳住阵脚，市场情绪还有救，通胀这边也不省心。虽然最新 CPI 数据看着温和，但他们指出核心商品价格有上涨压力，住房租金下降也未必能兜底。全球商品和能源价格的波动更是火上浇油，如果关税继续推高，通胀可能失控。美联储下周开会估计不会动，但2位专家预测增长预期会下调，通胀预期会上抬，市场已经在热议美联储会不会因此陷入进退两难。最后他们还聊了即将出炉的数据和全球央行动向，下周美国零售销售和工业生产可能偏软，中国一比2月数据倒是可能反弹。日本和英国央行应该会按兵不动，但日本工资上涨或许为以后加息埋伏笔。这场对话把关税政策和通胀的复杂纠缠讲得透彻，点出了未来几个关键节点，像4月的关税决定和美联储预测更新，值得我们盯着看。全球经济这盘棋现在真是步步惊心。接下来是英文会议的全部内容，如果您需要英文原稿和我的投研助理人工校对的中文文本，您可以在频道的 Patreon 上获取。
Welcome to the JP Morgan Weekender. I'm Bruce Kasman, and with me this weekender is Joe Lupton. Hey, Joe, how you doing?
Bruce, you're doing the Weekender on holiday. Look at the commitment. People should appreciate that.
Yeah, I can't stay away. It's too much to talk about.
I know it's all me, Bruce. You just can't leave me.
Yeah, I can't go this long without having a good argument. So let's get going. I think there are two broad conversations we've been having. One is, how do we read the activity readings in the start of the year? And the other is, how do we think about the way policy is playing through the sentiment indicators, recognizing that to the degree that you're getting a hit there, it's going to, at some point pretty soon, start to show up in the activity readings. I guess my reading is that we have downshifted somewhat, particularly in the U.S. as we've gone into the first quarter, but that the activity readings are still consistent with a pretty solid underlying picture in terms of where the U.S. and the global economy is. But that story is in many respects secondary to the big picture here, that the tariff threats, the constant drumbeat of what may happen and what may happen soon, and actually tariffs that have actually gone up this week, are all combining to start to do direct damage, but as we've been focusing on quite consistently here, are also starting to hit sentiment. Obviously, you see today's Michigan survey, but we can also see it in some of the business surveys. And I think one of the interesting things is we'll start to see March business surveys coming up. And in some ways, the question is whether or not we've already done enough damage through those channels that we will see big impacts on activity. How important will be the decisions that are upcoming as we look to early April, where there's threats of tariffs coming on. And in some ways, I guess the question I'll ask you, Joe, because I know you've been more worried from the point of view of the policy side, is do you think we're already done enough damage here that we're going into recession?
I think you have to be careful how to answer that question, because I would say if this is a massive if suddenly things turned around and let's say kind of Trump came in, did a mea culpa, and you know what, we're not doing this. We come here in April 2 and no, we're not doing anything. And let's be more realistic. Let's say he finds some way, some performative way to say he got some win that he can show to his base that he did some good with the chaos that has been created. And so we're sitting here with average tariff rates that have actually come back down from where they currently are, or maybe even stayed. Well, I would say come back down. If you gave me that, I would say I think
What if they don't go down, but they don't go up much from here?
Right.
I mean, that's a more realistic.
It is, and I would say if they stay where they're at, and certainly if they go higher, then I would say I think the damage is done. And I think because what has
so you would argue that if we come in on April 2nd and we get no new tariffs, but we don't roll back anything else, we're already on a path to recession.
I think that would be consistent with our odds of 40% recession.
No, that would be higher than that, I would think. Why would you say?
Well, we currently have 40% recession built into our outlook. It's not clear exactly what's based into that, but in my mind, if we just stayed where we're at. And the point I would want to make here is average tariff rates are already up probably at least 3 to 4 times more than in the 2018-19 trade war.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that saying it's up 3 to 4 times is as relevant to say they're up what? They're up about 3 or 4 percentage points. That's the message that matters, I think.
It depends on who. I mean, our team is pointing to more like 6, right? But I don't want to get hung up on that. It's a lot. And
let's say it's 6, and let's say you look at the model estimates, which say about a 10% universal tariff on U.S. imports is worth about 0.5% on GDP growth.
Yeah,
that by itself is not a recession. I think it's the sentiment channels that are crucial for the recession, and that's why I think it is. It is. I
never disagreed with that.
But I think that's what is important about what happens next. So,
I totally agree.
But you just said if we don't have anything more happening in April, you're feeling like we're already done. I feel like what happens in April now is a pretty important event. I think we're moving closer to an edge. I think we're getting a sentiment hit here. We still haven't seen the March business surveys, which I think are going to be very important in terms of gauging how serious the shock is starting to build. But I have no doubt that it's big. I think if we go through April and we come in and we get tariffs on Canada and Mexico and we start to see reciprocal tariffs, I think we could easily go over the edge, because I think then you're going to start to magnify. But I don't think if we're sitting here in early April and he backs off on Canada and Mexico, he doesn't go through on reciprocal tariffs, I don't think we're over the edge. I think we're probably going to see a rebound in sentiment, and I don't think we're going to see that big a negative hit from the tariffs that have already been put in place. I think it's a pretty important signal what happens in April, and I think that's really the key right now. If he does follow through magnifying what's already happened, I think we are going to probably have to raise our recession probabilities well above that 40%. And I think if he does back off, we're probably going to sit here about the same place we are, which is to say we still are elevated, but it's a more likely scenario than not that we get through it.
If he hits me again, then we're really going to be upset.
No, but I'm just coming back on what you said, which is if we stay where we are, then we're already done. That's what I'm responding to.
Well, what I'm basing it on, Bruce, is like I do see already a significant sentiment shock. I see one kind of survey of CEOs saying that over the next 6 months, 70% of them see zero or negative growth over the next 6 months now.
Right, but that's a fluid thing. I think if you don't
Oh, it
follow
is.
through,
You may say, oh, they're assuming that we're going to go to 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. I don't know about that. They may say, there's so much uncertainty right now. And remember, we shouldn't act as though if he comes in on April 2 and says we're not doing anything, that means he's done doing anything for the rest of the year. That would be insane to think that, right? And I think you've burned that bridge of trying to make a coherent, strategic, clear plan, and anything you do is going to be faded. It's like, wait a week. I saw a funny chart that came out that was showing intraday tariff moves for the U.S. That's the world we live in now. So that uncertainty is going to live with us for a long time. You don't get that back by making one announcement that you're not going to do it on April 2. I mean, remember, it's only one day after April Fool's Day. So, I think it would be, very foolish to think that would be the end of it.
Okay, so I mean, what you're saying to me is you think we're already toast.
I mean, I've been on the more negative side since the start of the election because I think people kind of believed too much in the goodies and faded too much of the baddies of the policies that were coming. And so those probabilities have kind of moved a lot closer. The 40% we have for this year, I don't know, feels about right. Maybe it could be a little bit higher. I'm still in the mind that we're over 50 if we're starting to look out to the middle of next year. And that's partly of the fact that the economy was doing so well through 24 that it's almost like you could only do bad. And we're certainly checking off all the bad boxes here. So it feels a little bit like the wheels are going to come off here rather than go round and round.
I guess I look at it a little bit differently. It's not that much differently. I think we're on a path here where the policy signaling and the uncertainty, I think we can't continue to build on top of this. I think if we did kind of start to shift the signals somewhat, I think we could possibly make our way through here. But I do think if we come in and we put in 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, 25%, I don't know. I don't think everybody agrees with it. I've had lots of conversation with people who don't agree with it. But I think if we come in on early April and we do that and we do the auto sector and we do reciprocal tariffs of some side, I think at that point we will need to reset our probabilities again and push them probably above 50%. I think that's where I sit.
I would be open-minded to the idea that if everything just kind of flatlines as of April 2, I'd be open-minded to the idea that we can avoid this. I want to.
I want to say something.
I think. Well, let me just finish this last thought. That my concern is what I said earlier, which is that assumption that if we don't do anything on April 2, then we're done. I think that's very foolish to believe that.
Well, I think uncertainty is an important element of the macro picture, but I think the translation of uncertainty into macro drags is a tricky thing to try to forecast. I think the consumer sentiment story here, the relationship between consumer expectations and spending is extremely loose. I put more weight on the business side of the equation. We still haven't seen March surveys. I think they're going to get hit, but they will be the first month probably that will have a meaningful fall in global manufacturing expectations in this phase, and I think they could end up stabilizing here if things don't continue to magnify from the point of view of the actual policies. But we'll see where we are. I mean, the point you're making, which is a important one, is it's hard right now to see the brakes on the policy action side, and that
alone is going to be hard to get back, right? In some sense, fear is the expansion killer, right?
That's where I disagree with you. I think fear interacts with things, and it has to be sustained for a while. I think you can have, as you've had in a number of cases in the past, you can have a very scary thing that happens over a month or two, and if it doesn't get followed by the realization of those fears, it doesn't actually have as much damage on the economy as you might think as you're living through those couple of months.
If you can unwind that fear
But I think, for example, we're starting to fade the Doge stuff. I think we're beginning to see that the types
Fade it in
of.
what way, Bruce?
I think fading it in the sense that
we're thing, or fading it that it's going to be a bad thing.
No, fading it in that we're not going to get as big and broad cutbacks in government hiring as and government employment as we might have been worried about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So
I see where you're coming from on that, and you can see the news. I don't know, Bruce. I don't. I mean, this thing is moved so fast, so fluid. It's being. There are very powerful forces that are driving these efforts, and I think it would be a mistake to think that court case here, court case there. I don't know. I'm not convinced that.
I don't think it's just court cases. I think it's also the disruptions that's happened, the blowback, the way I think we're going to start to see the cabinet authority start to be reasserted in terms of running departments' budgets. We'll see.
This cabinet meeting didn't show a lot of spine across a number of the people.
Okay, well, let's see. I think there's some other things we should turn to talking about here. Yeah. I want to turn to talking about the Fed next week, which is pretty important. But let's just say a word about the inflation news. So we had a more benign CPI than we thought this week, although I think what's happening here.
A little bit, Bruce. I
think what I want to say is I'm not sure even a bit at all. I think what we had is a benign reading on the CPI that did not have a benign signal for the PCE, and that's just flipping last month's signal. I think when you look at the first 2 months of the year, it feels like you're going to have a run rate on both core PC and core CPI that's going to be above 3%. And then,
well, let me put it this way, Bruce, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you know the numbers better, but I think it's still the case that the 3-month run rate on CPI, the 6-month run rate on core CPI are still above the 12-month run rate. So doesn't that point to a signal of acceleration?
Well, that's the CPI, and then you have the PC, which was going in a much more benign way, but then I think we get a February reading, which is moving higher. I think when I break it up, what I'm seeing is a clear message that the rent of shelter is coming off, and probably coming off a bit more than we thought. A clear message that there's upward pressure on core goods, which is more than we thought. And then a lot of noise and difficulty in reading signals when you get to the supercore. And the supercore and CPI and PCE are different animals. They've been having different dynamics around it. But I don't think when you this conversation obviously becomes secondary to the tariff story in the next few months as that starts to kick in. But I don't think when I look forward from here and I start to build that in, I don't think I can give more weight to the rent of shelter than I can to the core goods, which are going to be the front line of where the tariff stuff is going to be felt. So, on net, I'm feeling stickiness at the minimum, and maybe some acceleration around the starting point where we kind of.
By the way, Bruce, just to broaden that out, it's a global story that the January prints, at least that we have in hand. January is a pretty strong month, right? And I think you're seeing some of the services sticky, maybe coming off a little bit, but sticky. But the good side is perking up.
The good side is definitely perking up, I think, and that's obviously got the set of things around global industry doing somewhat better. The kind of pressures coming from energy. Energy is probably fading a bit, but certainly the commodity stuff is coming into the picture. And now you got tariffs. And we can't separate these two, because there's always, even regardless.
Not yet.
No,
January
but
you can.
Yeah, January and February you probably can, but the forward-looking edge of this, even if we didn't go any further,
maybe
on
not
tariffs,
February, right? Because the China tariffs were in February, right?
I think they were mid-Feb, right? They came in so maybe there's a little bit, but I think that's a little early to kind of feel the full impact. But let's put that on the side for a second and go to the Fed, which I think is an interesting storyline. As they're sitting here, we know they're not going to do anything next month. We know they're not going to guide very clearly as to where they'll be in May. Probably guide, I think, on at least on the continued caution, which should keep us of the mind that they're probably not planning on moving in May unless they get really surprised and I think worried at this point. And then the question is, I think, how are they going to incorporate all of this that we've been talking about, including the inflation news, including the sentiment and the concerns going forward on growth and the concerns going forward on inflation. I think there's got to be a bias. They lower the growth and raise the inflation forecast, but how much they do of both. Before we were talking for a minute before this call started, and you said you thought they'd be inherently very, very cautious in terms of making any changes in the forecast.
I think I'm always hesitant to make these kind of coherent, coordinated views on forecast the SEP simply because, as you know, and most viewers know, these are not coordinated events. These are all individuals setting in their own forecast. This is a particularly touchy time for the Fed right now. I almost, before the recording here, I was just kind of musing if there was some memo that went around, like, be very cautious with what you're doing on your forecast here. It sounds a little conspiratorial, but yeah, my gut is that they really don't want to have a forecast that raises a lot of attention in the administration. And in fact, let me make this general point. I almost think when we were talking earlier about, hey, will the U.S. skirt a recession or not? I think the worst outcome for the Fed is skirting a recession, right? If growth slows sufficiently, but we still have this world, we will have inflation that we're living with from tariffs and whatnot. And then our just more baseline global call for a while has been sticky inflation. If we're in that world, and we've been saying the Fed's going to find it difficult to be cutting rates here, that's really going to raise the ire of the administration, of Trump. And I think that's not a position the Fed's going to feel very, very comfortable with.
Maybe. I don't have any problem with you saying that. I do have a problem with saying that that's the worst world. I think a recession is a bad.
Recessions are bad. Yes. It's the worst world for the Fed. And frankly, you could say for Fed independence, right? If suddenly if this spirals into if a precondition for Fed independence getting ended or severely threatened or damaged is a world of very weak growth and high inflation that keeps the Fed on hold and therefore brings the wrath of Trump in, that actually could be a very negative outcome in the long run.
No, I see what you're saying about that, but I just want to continue to hit on the point. Once you go down the road, recessions are not only bad, but they tend to do damage in ways you don't appreciate till you go through it. It's going to make life difficult for the Fed because the recession will be accompanied by rising inflation at the beginning. So certainly the Fed will put more weight on the recession, but it is going to have to deal with higher inflation. And Lord knows what the political environment the Fed will operate in. You're right that their independence will be challenged if they don't respond to a sluggish economy, but I think they'll have some pretty difficult times in a recession as well. But let me just also talk about the SCP for a second, because I guess I'm more inclined to see significant changes here. Their forecast for GDP, and I'm focusing on, I'm thinking about the forecast right now.
Okay. But just to be clear, you don't expect changes in the dots.
I'm not sure. Let me go through it because I'm thinking through it as I'm talking.
yeah, on the fly. Here we go.
So they've got a forecast of 2.1 for GDP for this year, and the first quarter is coming in light, and then you start to build in any rebound you might have had off of that. You've got a shade because of the tariff uncertainty story. I could easily see that going down 3 or 4 tenths, which I think would be more than that'd be a reasonably significant shift. I wouldn't be shocked if they were at 1.7 for the year. And then you have, I think it'd be harder to kind of push the inflation story hard, but because they've already put a little bit in their deck SEP for tariffs. So they're at 2.5 now. I mean, we're sitting here thinking if we follow through on even a little more of where we have gotten to today, that it wouldn't be hard to see something close to a percentage point on CPI. So I wouldn't be shocked if we went to 3 on core PCE.
Really? Oh,
From
my
2.5. Yeah, no, I think that's my. No, I'm not just being provocative. I think you want to at least be leaning in the
already revised up. What, half a percentage point?
3. No, they went from 2.2 to 2.5, so they're up 0.3 from the. So yeah, I think you could easily get them to move towards 3. And then I think the interesting thing is, as you're saying, what would they do to the dot plot? I mean, I would be inclined in that environment to be more patient and to take out a cut, but I don't think they'll do that.
3, if you're saying 3 and growth is still running at potential.
1.6. Well, no, it'd be a little below it potential.
Not even. That's not even worth saying, Bruce. It's
because they probably wouldn't change. They won't change the unemployment rate forecast up with the growth revision because it's a supply part. There's a supply side story that's weakening as well. So they'll probably keep they have 4.3 there, and we're at 4.1 now. So they certainly, I don't think, would be in a position to push that up any higher. They'll keep that unchanged.
That's my point. I was going to say that, which is you've got kind of potential growth, an unemployment rate that's at neutral, and you're forecasting for this entire year 3% core PCE. And you don't think they're going to change their dots?
Oh, I was the one. I was the one who's. I'm saying I'm thinking through this as it was. I never got to the dots. And
I see. Well, then I'm just going to jump. I'm going to jump in front and say, yeah, I can't. I would love to talk to a governor that wouldn't move their dot up with that mix.
Okay, so there we go.
Maybe Waller would be the only one as he's.
So there we go, Joe. So we get a surprise in which they move more aggressively on both, and they take something out. Maybe they take one out. Of the forecast for the year.
Yeah.
And that's what's interesting about that is that in some sense what we're actually, so that might be their inclination in terms of the SCP. I think our inclination is to be much more worried about the tail on the downside on growth, which would deliver more Fed easing, not less Fed easing than they've got in the
my thinking on this is that they have next to nothing from gain from putting out a SEP like that, and everything to lose by putting out a SEP like that.
Yeah, you're right. The political calculus may be against that, but I'm not sure that that's going to win the day here. We'll see what happens. My point is, I think this is a time you probably should get a bigger change in the forecast, and it. I came in thinking about the biases on growth and inflation, and now I'm agreeing with you. If you take those as the ones I expressed, then that probably should give them less reason to think about easing, even though, as we know, the bias, if you're going towards more damage to growth, even if it comes with higher inflation, is a more active and easing Fed.
Yeah.
So.
And I would underscore that, like, our natural language processing actually has pivoted quite a bit in the more hawkish direction, which is consistent with, I think, market perception of a hawkish pivot since December. So I've always, I recognize the asymmetry that you've been pushing. I tended to think that worked in theory until you started to see inflation pressuring them, and I felt like they would get uncomfortable with that. It's for that reason I don't think they would put in that type of macro story, because then I think they would have to push the dots up.
Okay, so let's sort of close up here, but before we do, let's just do a bit of a look through to next week. We should point out we'll have Empire, Michigan, and not Michigan, Philly next week, so we'll get some more of that softish sentiment. We'll see how soft it is in the manufacturing surveys, but we have hard data in retail sales and IP next week. I don't know what the forecasts are, Joe. So why don't you take us home with that?
Well, we actually have next week's going to be a busy week. So the retail sales numbers, just on the control number we're looking for. I'm surprised. I think it's going to be something like a tenth. That may switch to 2/10. Our card data is pointing to something like more like 2/10. And everyone should remember you had a very weak January. So to me,
1/10, 2/10, who cares? Still soft.
Yeah, exactly. Soft. IP manufacturing should be relatively strong based on the payroll report of 3/10. Again, I don't know exactly how to read the signal in that in terms of front loading. We get China data next week. We're coming out of the kind of dark period of January, February. So we're going to get the Jan-Feb combined data, and it's going to be strong. Remember, we're looking for China to be strong this quarter. That's been our call for a long time. And this should hopefully point to a bounce back. Although the TSF credit numbers that came out today were on the weak side. Not that that marries closely with activity data, but nonetheless, that's worth noting. Shouldn't forget, we have BOJ and BOE next week.
I forgot.
Yeah, you're on holiday, Bruce, but we're not looking for any action from either, but obviously the BOJ is interesting. They're on their own course. We think 50 basis points of hikes in the second half of the year. And this week we did get the Shunto pay wage rounds, which have been strong. The wages are definitely moving. And so in some sense that supports our call. I've been a little nervous if the growth numbers are getting weaker, if they're going to stick with that. But nonetheless, the team is holding on to that. Bank of England, we have them on hold. I'm nervous about the labor market there, which is looking on the softer side.
Okay, so we'll leave it there. Next week, I think we're flipping. I'm in Asia now, and you're in New York. And next week, you'll be in Asia, and I'll be in New York. Yeah, exactly. So with all this excitement going on and all this travel going on, I hope we can continue the conversation next week on the JP Morgan Weekender. Take care, everybody.